Hello and welcome back to Tickling the Void podcast with me, Shawnee Boy. This is episode 3. This is a meta podcast where I try to dig myself out of the existential hole of dread and misery I find myself in, caused by this dystopian nightmare matrix we're all trapped in, by making a podcast exploring this nightmare matrix we're all trapped in. We've got another guest in the studio this week, and before we get started, it's the usual plug for the Patreon. If you think what we're doing here is good, if you enjoy these conversations, if you want to see more of it, then please donate to the Patreon, become a member, patreon.com/ticklingthevoid. These things cost money to make, and it'd be great to just cover the costs after this initial run so that we can keep going, because, I don't know about you, but I think this has got legs. Anyway, today we've got a special guest in the audience. That sounded very childish. I'm sorry, Alan. I'll try again.
It is the panto season.
It is panto season. You're right. We've got a special guest in the audience to talk about Scotland, Scottish politics, culture, and just the state of the place, and how we fit in, because we're living in a mental time, and what does that mean for people who are living in this the best wee country in the world?
It's called the best small country in the world.
The best small country in the world.
They didn't even come up with the word "we" in order to make it more Scottish. They actually used small instead, which I think small sounds smaller than we.
Small does sound smaller than we. Oh, I've got to introduce you, Alan Bissett. Playwright. Not a poet. You're not a poet.
Not a poet. No, one good poem. That's it.
And author. Thanks for coming in, man.
Thanks
How
for
you
having
doing?
me. I'm up for it. I'm good. It's Christmas time. There's no need to be afraid.
There's no need to be afraid of Christmas. I don't know. At
Christmas time, we let in light and we banish shade. That's what I've heard.
That sounds a bit like a poem. Are you a fan of Christmas? Do you enjoy it?
I love Christmas, actually.
Oh,
I mean, obviously it's got its hassles, but by the time you actually get there, first of all, you get loads of good nights out with your pals. Everybody makes an effort to see each other. I like giving presents and getting presents. Currying in on Christmas Day and all that. I love it.
Good.
Obviously, you didn't love it come January when you look at your bank balance, but that's a different thing.
The January blues,
The Monday of months.
It's tough, man.
Nobody likes it, especially if you're a freelancer. So you're skint after Christmas, and then you've got your tax bill.
I know. Tell me about it. I'm not looking forward to that.
Nobody's going out. Nobody's wanting to see it. So weather's shite. Fuck January.
It's a good start. Fuck January.
It sounds like a good name for a band.
Fuck January.
Let's go with it.
That would be my if I was going to stand on how do you deal with winter? How are you for winter? Are you
I didn't love it.
Right, but you're not.
See, if you get a really crisp, cold day, right. With no rain and no wind, that can be a beautiful thing. It's when it's howling a gale and it's pissing down and it's freezing and you never see daylight. There's not a lot to love there.
It's that I used to work in a kitchen, and you'd go in as it was dark. Early shift, 8 o'clock, as it was dark, and it was a basement kitchen as well.
Fuck.
So you're seeing no windows, no nothing. Oof. And then you'd finish a shift at 5 or whatever, and it'd still be pitch black. And it's
that's Assyrian. You go months without seeing the sun.
Yep.
God,
brutal, man.
It's like Lanark. You know what I mean? Just wandering about searching for sunlight.
Don't slag. What would you call people from Lanark? Lanarkians?
Possibly. I was referring to the Alistair Gray novel.
All right.
Maybe that's how people in Lanark feel.
I thought you were just slagging
Lanark is so grim that it feels like seasonal affective disorder all the time. Apologies to anybody there for Lanark.
We do. Don't mean to cause offence to the Lanark population.
No, the Lanark community, they're underrepresented, so let's not make things worse for them.
That'll be a Creative Scotland application right there. Oh, right. Well, today, we're just gonna really reflect on the state of stuff, man.
Right.
I know that's exactly.
That's the face. Let's reflect on the state of stuff.
It's just let's just talk about Marvel films or something.
Quite happily. Honestly, we could fill an hour with that. Right, let's start with that.
Let's start with
Everyone's been pissed since Endgame.
It has been. Maybe that was the
Spider-Man No Way Home, Deadpool and Wolverine.
I didn't even like Deadpool and Wolverine.
Didn't you like Deadpool and Wolverine?
Nah. I thought it was too. I don't know. I just thought it was too meta.
Too fan service.
It was too It was too much. You could see the executives working behind the scenes on that, and I enjoyed seeing them together. They were brilliant together.
Mm-hmm. The classic costume as well.
Yeah.
And see when they put on the mask for the comics and started getting torn into cunts. Yep. I was all in.
And it had its moments, but I just thought, just in terms of what that represented, in terms of how that industry's going, I thought that was just sort of peak.
It is starting to eat itself, I suppose, isn't it? That's the very point of Deadpool and Wolverine. It's like, how many in-jokes can we get about the state of the Marvel universe? And there's even jokes about the DC universe in there when Henry Cavill popped up. So it is a kind of sign of the very decline that we're talking about, even if it's done in a really entertaining way.
It is, and there hasn't been. I mean, they've been in the downhill slope since
Endgame.
I mean, even Endgame, I would argue, was
controversial.
I think that wasn't the best ending for it. I
prefer Infinity War.
Infinity War's great,
but Endgame, you weren't feeling it for Endgame.
Nah, I thought the whole time travel thing was just a bit. I thought it was a bit of a cop out.
Right, aye.
And I thought,
it's easy, innit?
And I thought they sort of they basically just redid Endgame. They redid Infinity War, but just in
the other way around.
The other way around, and it just felt a bit. I would have done something different.
I love Thanos. I fucking love Thanos, honestly.
I
wanted him to win.
Big Josh Brolin fan, or?
I mean, he's a good actor, aye, but
the actual character,
that's it for me. I was gutted when they defeated him, to be quite honest. I was like,
it's a really nihilistic view.
I mean, he's a nihilistic character, I suppose, but see, when he sat down and knowing that he'd lost, he died with dignity. You know what I mean? I'll give him that.
This is taking quite a dark turn. Thanos. I actually wrote that on a ballot paper, because I've given up voting for political parties, because fuck them all.
Yeah.
And I wrote Thanos was right. I just scrolled Thanos was right across the ballot paper.
I mean, are you allowed to take photos of your ballot paper? Because that probably should go in the National Gallery.
I wasn't wrong,
No. I mean, when you're faced with those choices,
it's tough.
The tendency would be, why don't we just wipe out? And I was going to say, why don't we just wipe out half of humanity? Let's just go the whole way. Do you know what I mean? Like,
are you excited for the aliens? Because I'm waiting for that. Like an alien invasion, I'd be quite up for that. Just now,
got to be an improvement.
I'd be like on their side. I'd be a wee. No, guys, come on in. Just I'll show you where all the good stuff is.
I mean, if they've managed to travel across the galaxy and reached us, it probably suggests that
they don't need my help.
Possibly no, but let's give it to them anyway.
Traitor to my species. I don't know, but it's a brutal time. I used to make fun of people who all they do is sit and watch Love Island and stuff, and they didn't know what was going on. They didn't care what was going on. And they just, do the whole entertainment dross in their brains and all that stuff. And I'm starting to come round to it.
Well, see, the more you know about politics and the way the world is organised, the more despair you feel. So I can perfectly understand why people just think, you know what, I don't want to be depressed all the time. Like, I didn't put the news on anymore. Like, when I was growing up, right, the TV was on all the time. It was on for the moment the first person in the house got up to the moment the last person in the house went to bed. Even if nobody was in the room, even if nobody was watching it, the telly was on, right? Now, what that meant was, as a child, I was aware of the news, even if I wasn't watching it, because I'd be in the room when the news was on, right? And partly because the nature of broadcasting has changed. Obviously, when you're streaming, you're choosing what you want to watch. It's not just a rolling series of programmes and you've got no control over what you see, right? But also, we didn't have the telly on all the time in the house when nobody's watching it. We only have it on when somebody is purposefully intending to see something, right? And it occurred to me that my Waynes, right, the oldest of whom is 8 and the youngest is 6, have got no idea what's going on in the world, because news never reaches them in the way that it did me. So I was aware of the miners' strike, for example, and the Falklands War and all these big events of the 1980s because they happened to be on the news when I was in the room. And I'm thinking, am I doing my kids a disservice by making sure they are unaware of what's actually happening in the world and all the terrible shit that's going on? Or am I doing them a kindness so that their childhood is, lovely? And I haven't quite worked out which it is. All I know is I didn't want to watch the fucking news. So it's not going on.
If you do want to watch the news in this day and age, you're a psycho.
I mean,
you get something wrong with you.
That is a masochistic tendency right there. And also, during the referendum, coming back to that,
it probably will be. Maybe
I became aware of what a rigged game it was. Because you hear about propaganda in other countries and the media being, essentially an arm of government. And I always thought, aren't we lucky in this country not to have that? We've got a free independent news service that holds power to account. And then the referendum happened, and you're like, oh, this is what that's like. Mm-hmm. And you were comparing what was happening on the ground that you could see every day to what you were being told was happening and going, what? Oh. So ever since then I've thought, like, I want to be informed, but I didn't want to be informed by you.
And who do you turn to? Who?
You.
Please don't rely on me for any of your news.
I trust you more than them, put it that way.
That's a low bar. It's a low bar. But who do you turn to? Because with all the mad stuff that's happening just now, I mean, one thing you're expected to know all if you're plugged into your social media and everything, because everything happens all at once, all at the same time. Mm-hmm. And everybody's apparently an expert in all these complicated issues and all these complicated things. And it's competing narratives on top of competing narratives on top of, competing country interests mm-hmm. and financial global interests, and trying to make any sense of anything that's happening leaves your consciousness is just, mine's feels shredded.
I mean, that's a pretty good description. I think I've started to trust maybe certain voices on the internet who I've been reading and observing for a long time, and who you start to feel have been proven right in various issues over a long period of time, and who are being funded by the readers.
Aye, not some nefarious dark money.
Right? So there's no some shadowy figure behind them, some right-wing think tank that is making sure nobody knows they're actually the ones behind it and are sending these people out as kind of propaganda fronts. Which is possibly as good a description of our various established media outlets as you could find. But at the same time, I think you gradually start to learn who you can trust and who's going to give you, I don't want to say the truth, because that itself is a contested term. Mm-hmm. What is the truth? But you start to get a feel for it when you habitually read people who you believe have got it right before.
Yeah.
And
there was that, I don't know if you saw that thing a couple of months ago, it was maybe 6 months ago, where a lot of the sort of the American right-wing sort of culture warrior type influencers and YouTubers who just punt out, slop content to cause disinformation and misinformation were all part of some Russian-backed media company that was paying them to do that,
Yeah, exactly, aye. And a lot of these people have absolutely huge amounts of followers who either don't know or don't care where the money's coming from. Mm-hmm. Because as The Wire taught us, follow the money. That's always the answer, follow the money. So it's just I've got less time and energy now to pull that thread than I used to.
It does. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of energy, and just you have to really build yourself up to even start. Even like if you've taken a step back to then dive into, Syria's kicking off just now, and it's all competing narratives about that. And even just the thought of trying to get to grips with what's happening there, it's just like, that's exhausting.
Well, also because what you really want is for somebody just to tell you who the baddies are.
Yep.
And oftentimes it's just more complicated than that. It's not always as clear cut as there's the Nazis, there's the Allies. That's a fairly clear cut example from relatively recent history that we can all look to. Which is why I think so many people find so much comfort, especially in this country, in stories about World War II, because it was just clear who the fucking baddies were.
Yep.
But in so many cases since then, it's not always as obvious as that. And so I find myself looking at various global conflicts and going, well, they're full of shit and they're full of shit. I didn't like what they're doing, I didn't like what they're doing, I didn't like what they're doing to them, but also didn't like what they're doing to them. And then you're just like, I would love to be able to just go, right, hang up the flag and say, here's the side that I'm on, yay.
Yep.
But I know somebody would come along with evidence that they've researched that would contradict that, and I'd look like a tit. So I tend to sit back now and just try and, rather than make statements, just try and absorb, and then let history decide who was right, so that I can then go, I was on their side all along.
That sounds like a cop-out.
But
an understandable one.
A cop-out, mate.
But an understandable one. Because it's, it does take it out of you. And, as we were talking about before we started, even me doing my stuff, even the broad topics that I've covered and the broad targets that I've hit, you have to, particularly in Scotland, you've got to wade through so many competing tribes and so much bollocks
before you get to anything approaching a settled position. I mean, I think generally a good guide, right, is who's got the bigger army? Who has walked into whose country and said it's theirs?
Right, all right. I thought you were going to go somewhere else with that. Who's the bigger army side with him?
No, the opposite. Who is backed by the biggest imperial powers?
Yep.
These things tend to be good rules of thumb for any particular local conflict anywhere in the world. Who's backing them, who has been the aggressor, and who has got nuclear weapons. They tend not to be the goodies a lot of the time, but that's not to say that the people they're oppressing are all paragons of moral virtue, because that's just not the case either. So I think if you've properly studied the history of any given conflict, and you've possibly even been to these regions, or you've read scholars on this and maybe produced a paper on it yourself, then you've probably got the right to speak as an expert. But I just didn't feel like an expert, and even the rough rules of thumb that I just said there the now are never quite adequate enough to fully explain anything. So I tend not to.
I don't know if you watched Tim Minchin's interview on Channel 4. He did like a podcast on Channel 4 recently.
No.
Do you know Tim Minchin?
Yes.
The Australian comedian. And he was saying, a lot of things that were similar to that, and just for his, for his well-being, who really wants to know his opinion on this topic that he doesn't have any, he's not a professional academic, he's not a professional expert in this. Why do you want to know his opinion on that?
I mean, he's got a point. I mean, I kind of flattered myself for quite a long time that people were maybe hanging off my every word to find out, well, what does Alan Bissett think about this? And maybe some people were, but not very many. And you realise that, well, I think there are certain things I feel quite confident in talking about, like the country that I was born in and grew up in, right? I feel like that gives me the right
some experience
to comment on the, Scottish affairs. But there's always the danger that you can be seduced by the attention, and you start off with, well, I've got something to say. I think I would be a good person to say it. Turns out you might even be right. But then because there's so many eyeballs on you and people are sticking a microphone in your face, that you then start to think, well, I'm the shit. And you kind of have to check yourself for that. Because I think, not all, by any means, but I think some, possibly even a lot of political activism is actually narcissism.
Yeah.
Because people want everybody to pay attention to them, and one of the shortcuts to that is to have a hot take on any given political situation. So that might sound a bit cynical, but just the observations I've made as a result of my entry into the political sphere, especially during the referendum, and also the observations I've made about myself, that you have to stop short and maybe go, what are you in this for?
Aye.
And if you can't honestly answer the question that you're no in it for attention, then you have to step away, which is one of the reasons why I did step away after the referendum. First of all, the result was in and we lost, and I was devastated. Secondly, I thought, well, people have maybe just had enough of me. If I was getting sick of me, then, it's possible that the rest of Scotland was like, oh God, this cunt again. Fucking hell, mate, sit down. So I sat down, and because I've essentially had 10 years away from it, raising kids, which completely decenters your ego, because as somebody once said to me, when you become a parent, you're no longer the star of your own story.
Aye.
Your life's no yours anymore. Your ego disappears because it's 3:30 in the morning and you're cleaning shite off your rain's arse, and they will only stop screaming, and you need to essentially make sure what they want and they need supersedes what you want and you need, right? So that's a really good way of checking yourself, you know. And just sitting back and watching how it's all unfolded over the last 10 years and realising that I was right about a lot of things, but I was wrong about a lot of things as well. And you maybe start to realise that while I wouldn't go as far as to say I know fuck all, I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And it's maybe worth, you know, admitting that and getting over yourself a wee bit. So really this is the first interview I've done on politics for about maybe 10 years, quite a long time, not quite 10 years, but quite a long time, just because I didn't feel able or confident enough or willing enough. So I'm seeing how it feels.
How does it feel so far?
I mean, it feels all right.
It feels all right.
But maybe because it's you. It's possible I might watch this back, though, and go, the fuck's he talking about?
Like, I think you'll be all right. I think you'll be all
let's
right.
hope so. There's still time.
There's still
time to fuck it up.
It's a positive
and I just
attitude.
know there's probably about, 6 or 7 unionist journalists who are like, oh, Alan Bissett's done an interview. Let's see if we can fucking nail him with this time. Come on, say something about the English. Come on, you wee bastard, say something about the English. I'm not going to do it. I'm not giving it to them.
I don't know, man. It's been a brutal time, man, and everything's got in Scotland at least. And that's what that sketch was about that we were talking about earlier. It's just a bit of the hostility. You know, when I did what I started to do with the sketches, I expected it to open up because we had that era, the era of suppression and that sort of gentrified authoritarianism, and I just expected us to maybe get out of that and go, oh no, I mean, we're Scottish, you know, we shouldn't be taking ourselves that seriously. We shouldn't be holding our politicians on pedestals to the level that we did. You know, let's open this up a bit, and it didn't. Everything went back down into everybody's little tribes and everybody's little... And that's exhausting, man.
Well, I mean, tribalism is, first of all, inevitable, but also depressing as fuck, because you do feel like people should be able to see past it, but no everybody can, myself included. I'm not above it. You know what I mean? There's definitely tribal aspects to me, as there is to everybody to an extent, you know. And I do think during the independence referendum, just to stay on that for a moment, people on the yes side and people on the no side were able to overcome their tribalism within those two tribes, because obviously if you look at the yes side, you had socialists, you had Greens, you had Scottish nationalists, you had various different artists, like coalitions of people who had maybe quite disparate goals but saw a Scottish independent state as being maybe the best way to realise them. In the same way that you had people on the no side, you had running the gamut for, the Labour movement to the Orange Order, who felt that staying within the UK was the best way for them to further their goals. So tribalism can be overcome if it's in the service of a greater good, however you want to define your own personal greater good. But I think what happened as a result of the no vote is that the yes side fragmented back into those tribes, and fault lines emerged that were sort of partially visible during the independence referendum, but everybody ignored them because we had our eyes on the prize. You can't achieve victory if everybody's fighting each other. And one of the things I loved about the independence referendum is that people found a common language to be able to get along and help each other, and pursue that common cause. And ever since then they've all started fighting again like ferrets in a sack. So that's what happens in the wake of a political defeat. It's the blame game. There's expulsions, there's reprimands, there's demoralisation, and for the last 10 years that's what we've been experiencing as a result of the no vote. But on the other hand, the last poll showed that 54% of people in Scotland want independence, which is remarkable 10 years after what was supposedly meant to be a shattering defeat. Because I think the unionist side genuinely thought that, all we need to do is get the no vote in the bag, and Scottish independence as a concept will just dissolve. People go back to caring about, the normal bread and butter issues that they cared about before. Independence will start to feel like a pipe dream again, and everybody will just get on with voting Labour. And that's worked out to an extent, but possibly no quite as comprehensively. I didn't think they'd expect Yes to be in the lead 10 years after the referendum, put it that way.
No, and I think it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting, always talking about dualities and that sort of thing, but political party-wise, I think independence is on its arse, right, from a political party perspective. And yet it's become so normalised just within the culture.
Yeah.
It's in the background. It's just that thing. It's maybe not front and centre. It's maybe not everybody's, the most important issue of the day. But because the referendum happened, because those conversations happened, because you had all that radical energy and everything, it hasn't went away, and it has settled into like the fabric of the country.
Definitely. Which is the opposite of what we experienced during the referendum campaign, where the mechanism for achieving it was right there, but the will was still some way behind that. There wasn't a majority for independence, or certainly not a settled one. Whereas now we've got what seems to be a majority, or at least 50%, a floor of maybe 47, 48 that doesn't seem to be going below that. The majority is there to be won, is right there, but the mechanism has vanished. And you're like, oh, right, fuck. You need both in play at the same time, and that's the difficulty that the independence movement is in. Apart from the fact the independence movement is at war with itself. What even is the independence movement now? Who is it?
I'm going to go on record here and say it's dead.
I mean,
for what we know it to be.
It exists as a concept.
But
it's leaderless. No disrespect to Swinney, but I didn't think.
Oh, let's give him some disrespect. Come on. Heaps spades of disrespect on him.
I don't think he's the man who's going to deliver independence, put it that way.
How would you trust him to deliver a letter?
I mean, he's not the worst. He's not the worst.
By a bow here, right?
One of the things that I promised myself I wouldn't do, and maybe this is the wrong decision, right, was to get torn about other independence supporters and activists and politicians. I have my opinions, but I think there's so much of that, and I'm not criticising people who do that, because exactly those arguments have to be had, right? And I sometimes am able to form my own opinions through people like yourself who aren't afraid to get tore in about other people who maybe even support the same things as them. Absolutely, fair enough. I've got a lot of respect for that. But I didn't want to contribute to it.
Yep, no.
If that's all right, just because what then happens is, and I think this is possibly where you've found yourself recently, factions start to claim you. We can use this guy in a war against that other faction. And one of the things I like about yourself is you refuse to be claimed. You've reserved the right for yourself to get tore into any cunt. And that's one of the reasons why I like your material, because you'll say, right, okay, who's acting the goat? Him, her, and I'm going to state it. But you've managed to avoid becoming a figurehead for a particular wing of the independence movement.
And even the other side as well.
Because I don't think it would be possible for unionists to say, well, he's one of yours now, he hates the SNP, we've got him, brilliant. Right, Sean, stick on this Union Jack Frock,
That's for the subjects that I've talked about and the targets that I've went after during the periods that I went after them, right? I started mine in 2022, I think. And that was we were still peak Sturgeon, we were still peak, everything's great, isn't it fantastic? But I've got such little kickback compared to other people who perhaps have said similar things to what I've said. And that's been, I get sniped and, whatever. Everybody's got their opinion. But in terms of like massive kickback, I've hardly had anything. The biggest bit of kickback I got was, I don't know if you've seen I've got the unionist character and the nationalist character, and they usually sit on the couch.
Yes.
Right, and it was when, I think, Sturgeon went, the SNP was in its arse, and I asked the very pertinent question to my mental unionist character in his full Union Jack regalia. Right, you've got it. Sturgeon's out. You said she was the problem. SNP's in its arse. They're probably going to be out. What now? And just for doing that sketch, I got the very same like unionists who are, wee Jimmy Cranky coming after me going, how dare I?
Oh, really?
And I think that was just because I was saying the thing.
Yeah. A question they can't really answer.
That was the entire point of it.
Exactly. So I think that's a good. I think you've inhabited that space really well. Like you've got a clear vision. You can see what's going on. You're not afraid to criticise people, but you've also made it impossible for any side to claim you as one of their own. And we need people like that. I just didn't want to be one of them. And partly that's because I didn't want to fall out with anybody. Partly it's straight up cowardice. Like it is. But at the same time, when it comes to the point where we might have to come together again, that's the hope, that there will be another referendum at some point in the future, or whatever form it takes, where the prize is there and we need to work together in order to get there. I've no burned bridges or other place, and people might find it possible to work with me. So, I mean, that's not to say I've not got opinions, which I'm happy to express privately, but I just didn't want folk to go, all right, he's one of them.
It's a dangerous thing, and it weighs on me constantly, and that's why I go into my pits of despair and misery. Probably why I'm in one just now. Probably why this podcast is here, is because there doesn't seem to be anyone out there or any sort of organisations out there, particularly in Scotland. And we're looking at like BBC Scotland, we're looking at Creative Scotland, we're looking at those sort of things, who are willing to create sort of those spaces that are open, where you don't feel like if you say something you could get pulled down into this or pulled down into that.
Exactly.
It feels like even the structures of the country, the structures of our society are falling down into those traps themselves.
Well, I mean, if you're being funded by anybody, ultimately you need to be answerable to them. That's really what it comes down to. But it's extremely difficult for anybody within a creative space or the political space to go and do their thing without being funded by somebody. Which is why I think people who can get by through Patreon or being funded by their readers or their audience, that's always going to be a better model, because they already trust you to. No, I don't mean to just articulate their own position. But I think people like yourself and McGarvey, who you had on yesterday, I didn't agree with everything that he says. But he's somebody who it's clear his audience trusts, and who's going to give you an interesting and informed and passionate take that's uniquely his, and isn't just what somebody else is paying him to say, which is his value. I don't think he's expecting everybody to agree with everything he says. I think he'd be disappointed if that was the case.
He does like a stooshy.
And he's good at that. Get him in the middle of a stooshy and you'll probably learn something. And I think it's extremely difficult. He's somebody who's done it, but it's extremely difficult to manage to create that space for yourself where you're still able to feed your kids, but you're not beholden to somebody else's agenda. That's the unicorn that everybody who works in the creative industries or the political arena is trying to get themselves to. But it's a unicorn because it's so difficult to do. Yep,
and especially in Scotland, because there are so few opportunities that, those ones that are available, while I can happily criticise people, a lot of people got to eat, and you've got to, at times you've got to make compromises,
Aye, and I've always found myself in admiration of the people who just refuse to compromise. Maybe because I've felt compromised, and I felt there's things that I wanted to say, like today, but I know what will happen if I do, and there'll be consequences for it, and I'll find myself in the middle of a shitstorm, and I'll have to spend days dealing with that, and I can't be arsed.
And is it worth it?
And is it worth it? And you know, that, and I have to say, this is maybe how they get you. And I didn't want to be one of these folk who's like, one should become a father, you know, because, you know, fuck that, right? Like I was 40 years I spent with it being a father, and I hated when folks said that, right? Like, I don't think you understand how the world works because you're not a father. You're not a parent. Once you're a parent, you'll understand. Fuck off, right? So I didn't want to be that person. But my priority in all things is making sure there's money coming into my house, especially because I'm a freelancer,
right,
and I've not got an employer. And quite frankly, Sean, I am unemployable now because I've been, my writing career started about 25 years ago when my first book came out. I've been a full-time writer for 17 years, and once my two kids reached a certain age, and I realised how expensive having kids is. And my wife also, she's not got a job. She's a freelance writer as well, which makes things incredibly difficult if you want to budget or plan or save or have a pension.
Pension? What is a pension?
Impossible. Exactly. These things are impossible. But you've got to pay the mortgage, you've got to pay your bills, your kids have got to eat. And so I thought, right, I'm going to basically, for my kids, give up writing, take a job. Doesn't matter what that job is, right? As long as it's bringing in enough money that there's a certain level of security. And my wife's career was starting to take off. I was like, right, you go away and be famous. I'll, basically I'll take a job as a fucking postman, right? I don't care. You submit a CV saying work experience, and it ends in 2007. Right, what experience have you got to working as a team member then? What about, are you good at delegating tasks? No, I've never delegated a task to anybody ever. Right, okay, what about your references? Oh, they're for 20 years ago.
Yep.
I mean, that I didn't want to be like poor me, right? Because, to quote Hyman Roth in The Godfather 2, this is the life that we have chosen. But when I realised that I was virtually unemployable at the age of 48, I shat it. And I thought, well, I've got no choice now but to just make the writing work. Make that work and try desperately to bring in as much money as I can. So politics is just secondary to that, to be honest with you. It's not to say I didn't have my opinions.
Yeah.
But anything that would interfere with being able to feed my kids, that's a luxury I can't take on. Which is the reason why I admire people who didn't make the compromises, because I feel like they're doing it where I can't. Just fucking say what needs to be said. And I'm glad those people exist. Like yourself.
Don't know if I'm also unemployable for a lot of other reasons.
Let's just employ each other. Let's do that.
That'd increase GDP. All that stuff. No, but it's a mad time, and we'll go back to the thing I said to you, because I'm feeling right now that in Scotland, and you will be able to speak to this, I'm feeling that we are right back at Renton's speech from Trainspotting. And it felt like we were going somewhere else.
Yep.
It felt like that was something that we would, it's part of Scottish culture. It's part of who we are now. But it felt like we were going somewhere different for a while.
Yep.
And now I think just when you're looking at the drug desk, you're looking at the alcohol desk, you're looking at the poverty, it feels like we're right back there.
It does. I mean, I remember seeing Trainspotting in the pictures when it came out, and I was a lover of the book already. Trainspotting is probably one of the seminal works of art that I've experienced in my entire life. Changed everything for me. As a writer, as somebody who grew up working class, as a Scot, right? And I was 18 when it came out, so I was the prime target audience for a bit. It was like a fucking bomb going off, right? It felt like a revolution. But obviously, like everybody else, that speech woke everybody in Scotland up because it resonated. You're like, fuck, that is what it feels like being Scottish. Which I think is a feature of being, I didn't even want to say the junior partner in a union because it makes it sound like we're partners instead of subordinates, which is the truth. Colony. I mean, one of the things I actually found really quite shocking about that speech is that he uses the word colony. And that's the bit of that speech that everybody forgets. Everybody remembers all the other bits of that speech, with the lowest of the low, with the scum of the fucking earth. But he actually says Scotland is a colony. And I think that this is where I'm going to get everybody online the more I'm getting fucking battered into me, right? How dare he say Scotland's a colony when Scotland was so clearly a coloniser of other countries? One of the things that frustrates me about that argument is it seems to be either or.
Aye.
We're either a colony or a coloniser, when both of these things are clearly true, right? And for people who say that Scotland's not a colony, well, okay, well, we used to speak Scots in this country until the Act of Union, and then people with power and influence decided that English was the language that would help them advance their ambitions, and so inculcated the rest of the population with the language of the coloniser, which is what happens, a textbook example of what happens every time a country is colonised. And Scots in Gaelic were literally beaten out of children with actual violence. Children who spoke Scots or Gaelic in schools were beaten. So what the fuck's that, right? Because they know that in order to successfully colonise a country, you have to eradicate their language, you have to make their language seem as though it's trivial or the language of the gutter, and make people embarrassed by it or physically, violently beat it at them, which is what they did. And, like, the case is staring us right there in the face. Can we leave the UK? No. Oh, I thought this was a voluntary partnership. No. Did you think that?
Union of equals.
Did you think that? A voluntary partnership? Oh, fuck. Oh, my dear boy. Well, if we can't leave, we're not allowed to express your democratic will. And one of the things I love is seeing politicians, unionist politicians, squirm when they're asked the question, what is the mechanism for Scotland to leave the United Kingdom? Is Scotland a voluntary partner in the... Of course Scotland's a voluntary partner in the United Kingdom. No one suggested otherwise. So how do we leave? Well, I think you'll find that was settled in 2014. Oh, right. So that speech has even greater resonance. It's not even that we're back to, Renton's speech. It has even greater resonance now than it did then, I think. And I'm trying to not be too despairing about things, because that is a very bleak speech, but there it is.
It's all right to be despairing. It's But that's. I say that Scotland single-handedly contributes to the mental health crisis of its own citizens, just by its own existence. And being Scottish, I don't rock with a lot of the nationalist stuff. I don't rock with the flags. I don't rock with any of that sort of. Even I've got my issues with the Tartan Army now, and I'm going to be careful with my next bit. It feels like we have, because we're not moving forward, even within the devolution settlement, right? No one's got a story. We don't have a story to tell ourselves. Our politicians are, Western democracy in general is just suffering the same sort of neoliberal malaise that we're suffering. But Scotland, I always say, is an excellent microcosm of the macro. And it feels like we're clinging to, our myths, you can see that in the independence movement. They're clinging to 2014 still. They're clinging to the yes movement as a term. To me, that's irrelevant now.
I mean,
even understanding why it's happening, you know, looking to the future, if anything else was to happen and you're building this thing based on the yes movement, you know, the language, I think it has to, if anything's going to happen, I think it has to change. I think it has to move sort of forward.
I mean, I think we're in just a real transitional period where it's clear that the momentum that was gained in whatever it was, 2011, when the SNP got that majority, and peaked in 2014. Well, actually, it probably peaked when we sent down, what was it, 56?
56.
SNP. That's the high tide of Scottish nationalism. And you're like, well, hang on a minute. Sending 56 out of 59 SNP MPs down to Westminster did absolutely fuck all. Where did we go? The UK are saying no, we're not going to let you leave. The SNP phalanx that went down there full of, you know, hope and energy, and we all thought, right, they're going to go down there and cause a ruckus.
Settled in.
Settled in.
Comfy Westminster benches.
Nothing happened. Nobody feels that there's a credible strategy for independence for the SNP to achieve it, or they would tell us what it is. You know. But at the same time, I think a lot of people who are still voting SNP, apart from your absolute diehard SNP loyalists, are doing so because they can't find it within themselves to vote for unionist parties, given what we all saw happening in 2014, and given their continual refusal of a right to express their democratic will. Why the fuck would I vote for them? Ever. But if we stop voting SNP, and I'm not telling anybody how they should or shouldn't vote, right? It's within everybody else's
spoil your ballot
conscience. I mean, I used to mock that kind of thing, but no. If we didn't vote SNP and the SNP dip, the unionists go, see, he's a fuck now. Nobody wants independence. And so people are voting for the SNP out of residual hope that at some point they're going to go, oh fucking hell, wait a minute, we've just found this plan for independence down the back of the sofa. We've got it. But, you know, like, it's almost like a nostalgic vote.
Yeah.
You know?
And that, I think, from the SNP at this point, you know, not to spoil anything that's coming in the future in terms of sketches, but it feels a bit mafia-esque to say, well, what else are you going to do? Who else are you going to vote for, huh?
It was Labour's argument for so long.
Exactly.
What's the alternative? You want the Tories to win? Right, get in line, vote for us. And look where it led.
I think we need to be, and this does my nothing about Scottish politics over the past 10 years and all the different sort of levels of PR and bullshit that we've had to wade through to get to any sort of answer to the questions that we're asking. It's not enough to be a bohier better than the worst. You know what I mean? It's not enough to go, aye, but we're slightly better than Westminster. We're slightly better than that. I think we've completely lost any sense of ambition.
Well, I mean, it comes from the top, really. I mean, one of the things that made it possible for me to get behind the independence movement wasn't just that I believed in independence and believed it was the right thing for Scotland. I believed in the leadership. You know, like, that was a leader I was prepared to follow into battle. And, you know, without wanting to dwell on it, I think we've lost something quite significant with his passing.
That, if we can just go back to that, the manner in which that was treated to me, I told you, I don't rock with the nationalist stuff, I don't rock with the flags and stuff, but the manner in which his like death and bringing him back was treated, I found that offensive. I found that, because there's moments in a country's history, there's moments which should be treated with dignity and respect, and the powers that be should be, you know, creating that sense of community, that sense of society, and showing reverence for that position that he held, and bringing him back with dignity and respect. And, you know, I think we messed that up massively.
Well, I mean, in my opinion, Alex Salmond is the best leader Scotland's had since Robert the Bruce, and I don't think the response to his death from the ruling party was quite up to what it should have been. But that is the start of a much longer conversation.
Which you can't have. Sorry, we're not going to get to jail. It's fine. It's fine.
I can feel it coming at me.
Do you have any... we've got about 10 minutes left. So do you have any hope for the future? Or is that a question that I shouldn't ask?
I've got... Well, okay. I have some.
Some's better than none.
Some's better than none. First of all, there is a majority opinion out there for independence. That is significant. We should never lose sight of that. That's something that we didn't have before. So there's that. Broader, going beyond independence, going beyond Scotland, I didn't have any real hope for Britain. I mean, look what we've got. We've got Starmer. You've got Reform outflanking them and the Tories. The very real possibility, which would have been laughed out of the room even maybe a year ago, of Nigel Farage being the Prime Minister of Great Britain. What the actual fuck? It
feels, I'm going to say that the world ended in 2012 and everything since then has been some mental simulation, because it just seems to be going, like, just when you think we've reached the point, and it was with Boris Johnson, you're like, it can't get any worse. Mm-hmm. Just in terms of ludicrousness, in terms of, and the media themselves during that period of time just absolutely lathered themselves in shit and were proud of it. And you're like, no, I thought you're supposed to be a proud institution which, revered the rule of law and the, all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And yet it seems even these things are just falling into this silly... it's not even silly because it's so insane.
Yeah. I mean, that's the stuff of pantomime, really. The idea that Nigel Farage... What's worse than Boris Johnson? Oh, well, probably Nigel Farage, but he's never going to be the leader of Great Britain, is he? Oh, fucking... Oh, here we are. So, Britain's a mess. It's falling to pieces. Nothing works.
Did you watch John Harris's stuff, the guy from The Guardian? He does a lot of the Anywhere But Westminster videos.
Yes, and he also wrote the best ever book on Britpop and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. So the man
I knew you'd fit that in somewhere.
He will have my eternal respect.
But just the scale of how broken everything is was he went to like some really cushy places down south of London, right? Really nice, traditional Tory towns, really posh. And even those places... were crumbling. Even those places had food banks and queues at food banks and stuff, man.
Thing is, nobody believes Britain works anymore. That argument that was put forth in 2014, broad shoulders, pooling and sharing, the economic might of the UK. I mean, it was a joke then, but even more now, because one of the reasons why Reform have been able to make gains on the two main parties is by using exactly the same arguments as the left, which is Britain's fucked. Now, they're identifying a different cause of the problem, which is immigration, right? Because that's what the right do. They're not really looking at the economic structure. Why would they, right? Because Nigel Farage is...
a millionaire.
Yeah, exactly. A stockbroker.
Multi-millionaire.
So why would they actually, engage in any serious analysis of capitalism? But on the right and on the left, and probably even in the centre, everybody agrees Britain is fucked. So when everybody has reached that conclusion, well, his days are numbered. Yep. So something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. It's a bit like when the Berlin Wall came down. For years before that, everybody had reached the consensus that communism was a sick joke, right? Or certainly the way it was practiced in the Eastern Bloc. So when the wall came down, it was almost like the work had been done already mentally by the population, which is what made it possible. But obviously that symbolic physical thing is, a very, very visually striking example of the end of communism, but it had been done before that. Nobody believed the system worked. And I think that's where people are with, the UK, possibly even with capitalism.
Yep.
Does anybody believe that capitalism is actually working? Well, rich people do, but, they're no very numerous. So that's where we are. And I did at one point maybe believe in, the role of the artists in challenging power and, imagining a different future. And certainly I felt that was, the role I wanted to take in the independence referendum. Again, maybe flattering myself a wee bit. But, I think a lot of... I didn't want to be a middle-aged man getting stuck into the younger generation of artists, because I would not have appreciated that when I was a younger man. I don't mean all. There's a lot of really incredible, talented artists who are in the younger generation and who are doing amazing things in the fields of literature and music and that kind of thing. But something's changed, I think, in the last 10 or 15 years. We'll put it this way. See, when I was a younger writer coming through, and I was 25 when my first novel was published, the generation above me was like Irvine Welsh, James Kelman, Janice Galloway, Liz Lockhead, Tom Leonard, Alistair Gray, absolute giants who had created so much space for the generation that I was part of to just walk into.
Aye.
It was almost effortless for us because they had done so much work in legitimising Scottish language, working class culture, the idea of Scottish literature is something deep and serious. They'd done all the work for us. And what I found was really a mutual support network among Scottish artists who said it's going to be much harder for us to find a hearing on the UK stage, let alone the world stage. Let's help each other, let's be supportive for each other, let's not get in each other's way.
Aye.
And it's almost like the complete opposite now, where part of the game of being a young artist is to see who you can take out in the chessboard in front of you.
Yep.
And you can see them doing it strategically through social media, through the signing of open letters, through whispering campaigns. How do we get that cunt out the road? Fucking, if I do this right, that'll knock them down, and then the path is clear for me.
It's all self-interest.
To just go through. The idea that you would deliberately sabotage another writer's career was shameful.
Yep.
And now that's just part of the game. And I'm like, how did this happen? I did it once. I publicly called out another Scottish writer, and I've regretted it since then, because I just thought, what am I doing? Why would I contribute that? That's what critics are there for.
Aye.
That's their job. It's not the job of writers to try and take down other writers. So I would like to apologise to you, Morrison, for that.
Takes a big man to apologise.
Well, it was out of order.
Fair enough.
I wasn't very happy about what he'd done, but, that's besides the point. I should have taken it up with him privately instead of sending a tweet out accusing him of being some kind of, British...
But that's what social media does to you as well, that. That's what social media does.
Exactly.
Feeds that ego, feeds that narcissism. Right, we need to wrap up now, but before we do, just to jump back to how we started this conversation, have you watched The Penguin?
I'm less invested in DC than I'm in Marvel, I must admit, and I don't know. I see all these like, we're going to do spin-offs focusing on the villains. Venom without Spider-Man, Penguin without Batman. No,
like it.
Villains only make sense in opposition to the hero. So do you know what? I'm sure it's good because everybody tells me it's good.
Colin Farrell, mate.
I mean, I loved his performance in the Batman. I thought he was great.
That made me, because when The Penguin came out, that made me rewatch the Batman, because I didn't like it when I watched it. I thought it wasn't for me. Didn't like it.
Okay.
Right? Watched it again and I absolutely loved it, man. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I don't know why I didn't like it the first time, but it made me completely reassess it.
What I might do when the next Batman film comes out, because I gather the intervening narrative, the Penguin is spanning that.
Yep.
It might make more sense for me to watch it in advance of that movie, so I can get the full force of it. But
it's worth it. Just as I say,
right,
some of them are rubbish, but I think the Penguin in particular is pretty worth a watch.
Fair enough.
Well, I think we'll wrap up there, man.
Why
Cheers
not?
for coming in. Really appreciate it. That's been a really good chat.
It has until the social media storm.
Nah, you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
We'll see.
You'll be fine. Right, we'll just wrap up there. That's been episode 3 of Tickling the Void with myself, Shoney Boy, and Alan Bissett. Just again, if you want to see this continue, if you want to keep us going, if you want to help us keep the lights on after this initial run is done, then get on the Patreon, patreon.com/Tickling the Void. You get access to early episodes, and we'll maybe even get a wee bonus episode in there if I can swing it as well. But that's been us. Cheers.
It feels good, man. It feels good, right? Yo, I'm in the light at the end of the tunnel. Paper stacks, yeah, I got them in the bundles. Harry Potter breaking bread with the muggles. They said I wouldn't make it, now they looking puzzled. They said I wouldn't take it, how to go and hustle. Get the bag, it ain't never getting fumbled. In the jack, but we came up from the bottom.